This audio question comes to us from Jason in the Bronx.
Hey, what's up, Solomonster? The streak is over. But my question is about the man who ended it. Brock Lesnar has been a dominant beast since coming into the WWE, having decisive wins over guys like The Rock and even The Undertaker in past meetings. Hell, even Stone Cold Steve Austin would have met the same fate had he allowed it. So my question to you, Solomonster, is do you think this was always the path for Brock Lesnar? Did Vince have this path laid out from the beginning? And if so, why was Vince dead set on having the guys that he had his company built on for the last 20 years being destroyed by this guy?
Well, I would hope it's because Vince gets it. He gets what Brock Lesnar is. You know, what Brock Lesnar is all about. he's a special guy. There's not too many people that have come into that company who look like Brock, who can move around like Brock. He's a monster, you know. And if you go back to when he first came into WWE, I think the reason to answer the second part of your question, why would Vince have this guy destroy all these other people who helped build his company for so long? Vince didn't know that Brock was going to leave and go try a career in the NFL and go to the UFC. They were building everything around Brock because they had long-term plans to make him one of the biggest guys in the history of that company. You know, he was going to be the dominant guy going forward. So that's why Brock came in, and within a few months, he won King of the Ring. 2 months later, he beat The Rock clean. Clean as a sheet in the middle of the ring for the championship at SummerSlam. And he had only been on television for like 5 months, 6 months. Probably not even that long. Then he went and he feuded with The Undertaker. How did that end? He beat The Undertaker in a Hell in a Cell match. Clean, in the middle. I remember that. Undertaker was just pouring blood in that match. It was one of the best Hell in a Cell matches, I think, in company history. So you got to be a special guy for, you know, The Undertaker to go in there with you, and he's going to put you over like that. Now, what was Undertaker's old catchphrase back then? I'll make you famous? Well, he made Brock Lesnar famous in that match. And Brock went on to have feuds with Big Show and Kurt Angle. He beat Angle in the main event of WrestleMania to win the belt. All these different people. He got a win over Hulk Hogan on television. He got a bear hug win over Hulk Hogan on SmackDown, like a week or two before SummerSlam. And I guess that kind of led to Hogan leaving the company a few months later because it was the understanding that Hogan would come back 2-3 months later at Survivor Series and beat Brock for the belt at Madison Square Garden, which is comical to look back on that now. I don't doubt for a second that Hogan would have wanted that. But these huge wins that Brock had when he was still a young guy, he was only 20-something years old at the time, 24, 25, whatever he was because they thought he was in it long term. They didn't know that, you know, less than 2 years later he would be out of the company. Had they known that, I'm sure they wouldn't have pushed him so hard. But as far as him breaking the streak, you know, was this laid out by Vince from the get-go? Was this the plan all along from the time Brock came back? No, I don't believe for a second that it was. You know, you read stories and you hear things. Is it true? Is it not true? You know, but by all accounts, I mean, it was Vince's decision for the streak to end, and it had everything to do with The Undertaker just being in the physical state that he's in and just not being able to go anymore. And I still think that we haven't seen The Undertaker's last match, but I admit I could be wrong. You know, that could very well end up being Undertaker's last match if he really is that bad off physically. You know, my guess would be that Vince saw that and he said, that's it. He made the call. And Undertaker had to go along with it. So I don't know that Undertaker would have wanted the streak to end that particular night, but he was like, all right, cool, let's do it. Maybe he knew. Maybe Undertaker knew. I mean, nobody knows his body better than he does. Only Undertaker really knows how bad off he really is with his knees and his hips and his back and everything else. You know, and there were rumors that he had a hip replacement many years ago, which I'm sure, look, if he hasn't had a hip replacement already, he's going to probably need 2. There have been stories about The Undertaker needing hip replacements going back to the late 90s. And even Scott Hall. Scott Hall underwent surgery for, I think he had a hip replacement. And I remember Hall kind of let the cat out of the bag, I think maybe by accident. He was talking to, I don't know if it was the same doctor who had treated Undertaker before, but Scott Hall went and said something to the effect of, yeah, you know, I talked to the same doctor that did Taker's hip operation or hip replacement, and I don't know that he intended to kind of expose him like that, but he did, and that's not a shock to me at all, because there were rumors that during one of his sabbaticals a few years ago, he went away for several months and It might have actually been the period before Undertaker came back in the summer. I think it was the summer of 2010. Remember when Undertaker was in a vegetative state? It was like in May over Memorial Day, the Memorial Day holiday or something. The storyline was that Undertaker was in a vegetative state. Kane found him that way. We found out later on that it was Kane who attacked his brother. When Undertaker came back for that feud with Kane, I want to say the latter part of 2010, and I'm pretty sure I said the same thing back then, he didn't look like the same guy that we had seen retire Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania. Something happened in that break between the Mania match with Shawn in Phoenix and his comeback feud with Kane for the world title. That's when Undertaker lost, I think, 3 straight pay-per-view matches or something like that to Kane, which was unheard of, because it was always Undertaker beating Kane in their feud over the years. But here, he kind of paid it forward, I guess, and Kane got these big wins over Undertaker. Paul Bearer came back. He turned on The Undertaker. All of those matches were pretty bad. And Undertaker just did not look physically in the ring like the same person. Now, he did come back later. He had some really good WrestleMania matches against Triple H. It's not like he never had another good match. But I always thought, like, something happened in that break, and I think that may have been the period where he may have had some hip surgery. But I think that's what it really boils down to. It wasn't a matter of, hey, we got this grand plan for Brock Lesnar, 2 years out, you're going to be the one to break the streak. I don't think so. I don't think that was the case at all. I think it was just, it's time for the streak to end, and it just so happens that The Undertaker is wrestling Brock Lesnar this year, and so, Brock, you're going to be the guy. If it was somebody else, it might have been them. I think it might have just been right place, right time. Alex from Vancouver, after seeing the Clique reunited at the Hall of Fame ceremony this year, I was wondering what you think would happen if an incident like that occurred today. Considering we are entering the reality era and kayfabe is less relevant than ever, do you think if we saw Daniel Bryan, John Cena, Batista, and Randy Orton embrace in the ring after a match, there would be severe consequences? Just asking this question makes me realize how few true heels there are today, but that is a whole other issue. I'm happy you brought that up because I want to tie this into something that happened this week with Jim Ross. But before that, do I think that they would face severe consequences the way that those guys did? Probably not. Unless it happened on TV. That would be a different story. But if it was at a house show or something, I mean, look, you probably have a lot of old school guys, right, that work for the company behind the scenes who would not be very happy. That was the case in '96 when they did it. Although there were also stories that some of the wrestlers were bothered by that. Bret Hart and, the British Bulldog kind of not snitched. I mean, everybody knew what happened, but they complained loudly about it, and they're killing kayfabe and all this other stuff. I think, all these years later, I think it's so much of a non-issue. If it's a house show, if it's something that's not done on camera where it would jeopardize storylines and stuff, I don't really see what the big deal is. And of course, of those 4, I'm sure John Cena certainly would not get in any sort of trouble. I'm trying to figure out, of that group, if they did get in trouble, who the Triple H would be. Triple H was the new guy back then, and Diesel and Razor were leaving. Shawn was the champion, and he was pretty much untouchable anyway, so it all fell on Hunter. So who would be the Hunter of this group? I guess it would be Bryan, ironically enough. Daniel Bryan probably would be the Triple H of that group if they did get in trouble. But I want to go back. I mentioned Jim Ross. Jim Ross went on something of a Twitter tirade this week about the lack of heels in wrestling, and specifically the lack of heels in WWE. And he posted a whole series of tweets, and I marked them down. I want to just read them. It's like 5 or 6 tweets. He said, "What traits must a top TV wrestling villain possess to motivate ticket buyers to invest in seeing the villain get their ass whipped? Who gets it? If pro wrestling villains rarely cheat, have abundant redeeming social qualities, they're not villains. Stop BSing yourself. Pro wrestling villains must have rules to break. What moves are illegal? Fewer and fewer. That fine gray line between good and evil is a joke." He then started responding to people who were tweeting him. Somebody mentioned Cesaro, and JR said, "What does Cesaro do to cheat or gain an unfair advantage? Nothing of consequence. Same for Lesnar." And I'll get back to that in a second. He said, "I'd estimate that half of today's TV wrestling heels are not equipped with guts and toughness to be great villains. Most would rather be cool." Somebody said, "It's the reality era. It's shades of gray." He said, "Shades of gray sounds all good, but where has that worked?" And how do you feel about tweeners? He says, "Generally, they don't draw a dime. TV wrestling villains must lie, selectively be a coward, be a bully when they can, gain an unfair advantage, bitch and moan, and disrespect the fans." So something must have set him off. I don't know what set him off on this tirade. But he mentioned Brock Lesnar, and I actually disagree on that. And I agree with most of what he's saying here. If you really look at the number of real, true dick heels in wrestling, there aren't really that many of them. I think, in TNA, I hated Aces and Eights. I just thought the whole thing was a giant waste of time. It was a failure. But when Bully Ray was at his most epic heel, his most epic heel self in TNA, there was none better than Bully Ray. Bully Ray was like the closest thing to a classic asshole wrestling heel that we had, probably in any of the major promotions. And now he's a babyface, so he's doing something a little bit different. So I agree with him in that respect, but on Brock I have to disagree. Brock Lesnar is the same guy who, back in January at the Royal Rumble, went up against a guy that was actually bigger than him. Now, it's not very often that Brock Lesnar will step in the ring against somebody bigger than him. He's bigger than most, but Big Show is going to be bigger than pretty much everybody else, except maybe Khali. But Brock went in there at the Rumble for a match with Big Show, and instead of facing him head-on, what did he do? He grabbed the steel chair and he beat the piss out of him. He beat the crap out of the Big Show with a steel chair, and then he left. He walked away. Like a true dick. Like a real asshole heel. Even when Brock isn't cheating, okay, maybe Brock doesn't hook the tights or hold the ropes and stuff like that. But when he's not beating up somebody with a chair, which is actually great, I love that because it's such an asshole thing to do. Brock Lesnar is this big tough guy who can probably go head to head with anybody with his two fists, but yet he resorts to using a weapon. Like, I think that's just classic heel tactics right there. But even when he's not doing that, he's got Paul Heyman there as his mouthpiece. Paul Heyman is his advocate. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. Heyman and Lesnar are the best duo. The best, manager-wrestler combo, I think, in the history of wrestling. They are so awesome together. And Brock can go in there and beat the crap out of people. He doesn't care about the fans. He doesn't play to the crowd. And that's probably a shoot. He doesn't care. He goes in. He wants to make as much money as he can. I don't really think he has any sort of allegiance to wrestling. Didn't then, doesn't now. But we're happy to have him because he's so good at what he does. He's a special kind of performer. So I love Brock Lesnar. I mean, I think he's great. And I think he's a great heel. Even if he's not raking the eyes and throwing powder in people's faces, I think there's a little bit of an old school, a little too old school maybe. Not every single heel has to rake the eyes and deliver a low blow. So on Brock, I disagree wholeheartedly. I think he's a great heel, and I think he's a great example, I think, of what other people should probably follow if they wanted to be a similar type of heel. But he is right in a lot of other respects, and I'll throw Bad News Barrett out there as an example. Bad News Barrett is not supposed to be a babyface, okay? That's not the way that he's booked. And I know Vince, now the new edict is that there are no babyfaces and there are no heels in WWE, and that's all fine and good, but that's not how they book. They still book along the lines of, okay, we want you to cheer for this guy, we want you to boo this guy. And Bad News Barrett goes out there every week, and he stands on his podium with his gavel, and he insults the fans, and he calls everybody fat. Okay, that's not a babyface, that's a heel. But when Barrett comes out, Barrett came out on that post-WrestleMania Raw, so maybe this is a bad example because that's a smarky kind of crowd. Did he really do anything illegal? Did he really do anything to get people to want to boo him? It was a pretty straight match, I think, that he had with Rey Mysterio, and, he finished him off with the bullhammer elbow, and he was playing to the crowd like a babyface. And it was great. Like, I was in the arena, and people were going crazy for him, and I actually felt really good for the guy because I couldn't even remember the last time he wrestled a match, so it was nice to see the people actually reacting to Wade Barrett with this gimmick. But you can say that Wade Barrett was an absolutely terrible heel. He was not doing his job. His job should not have been to go out there and do the whole thing where he goes, boom, and he puts his hands in the air. I think at one point he was actually actively trying to get the crowd to start a chant. Maybe it was the English fans, the British fans that he was playing to. That may have been it. But he's playing to the crowd. He's like looking for that kind of babyface reaction, but that's not who he's supposed to be. So I agree with JR in that respect. You got guys on the main roster. I don't want to say they don't know how to be a heel. I mean, it's not my place to say that, but I'm watching these guys, and it's true. You know, they're not really doing anything to get that kind of reaction. Like, go back even a few years. Who are some of the best heels in WWE in the last decade? Okay, I mentioned Brock. I think Brock would have to be up there. The two names, when I said that really popped into my head, number one is Edge, and number two is Chris Jericho, who's gone back and forth a lot. But Edge, I thought Edge was a great heel. And he would even do interviews, and he would say, my goal as a heel is to not be a cool heel, to not be like, you know, the NWO back in the day. His goal was to have absolutely no redeemable qualities to his character whatsoever. So that way, nobody would have a reason to cheer for him. And he was awesome. Chris Jericho, when he came back in like '08 and he was wearing the suit and tie, he would talk really low, which is like an old Jake Roberts thing to get the crowd to pay more attention to what you're saying. You know, Jericho went to management. They wanted to make him a t-shirt. He said, no, I don't want any merchandise. People are not supposed to like me. Why would they buy my t-shirt? So I'm sure he lost out on some money by doing that, but that's because he wanted to be a tried and true heel. And when you really look at, we'll take WWE as an example, over the last 10 years, you can't find a lot of guys like that. You can find maybe a handful, but not a lot. And I think that's probably what JR was getting at. And again, I don't know what set him off on this. I don't know if he's reacting to a certain person he saw on TV or if this is just a general thing. Somebody asked him a question. But he makes a lot of very valid points. I disagree on Brock, but on a lot of these other guys, and I use Bad News Barrett as one example. You know, the Wyatt family goes out there, they get cheered a lot, but, you know, I can't really blame Bray Wyatt. I mean, they're not doing anything wrong. Maybe they could be doing more to cheat and to do some really heinous kind of stuff, but it's not like they're going out there trying to play to the crowd. Maybe he is by trying to get them to do the whole, you know, he's got the whole world in his hands kind of stuff, but there's a lot to be said for the lack of real, true heels, like guys that you absolutely hate, not like The Miz, like get off my TV kind of stuff. A guy that you would actually want to pay money or tune into the, you know, main event segment on Raw because I can't wait to see this guy get his ass kicked. You don't really have a lot of that. You know, Randy Orton, he's a pretty good heel, but Batista, what about Batista? I think Batista now is great in this role. He was completely miscast when he came back as a babyface. Once it was obvious that people hated him or they resented him, you know, for taking a spot away from Bryan or whatever, it was the only move to make. And I think heel Batista who comes out and actually mocks the fans is so great. It's so great, and that's part of what makes a good heel. The people already hate me, so let me go out there and give them a reason to hate me. I remember the WrestleMania press conference in New York. He comes up to the podium and he's mocking the fans and saying, oh, people like to make fun of me for my skinny jeans. And he just gets on the mic and he says, I have one pair of skinny jeans, and I'm going to wear those skinny jeans every single week just to piss you people off. And I laughed. I thought that was so awesome. So Batista, I think, as a heel right now is great. But, you know, you can count on one hand how many great heels you really have. John Drix from Montreal, do you see Roman Reigns turning on the Shield and joining Evolution as its fourth member? I've gotten a lot of emails from you guys asking me the exact same question. Do you think Reigns? Do you think somebody's going to turn and join Evolution? I don't think so, but if anybody was going to turn, I figure it would be Rollins or Ambrose, not Reigns. I think Reigns' big singles future coming up is as a babyface, and plus Batista's already kind of the heavy. He's the muscle of the group. You don't really need two guys like that. If it was going to be anybody, I think it would be Rollins or Ambrose, but I don't think that's going to happen.